This morning we're going to read from the first chapter of the first book of the Bible, so page 1 in the blue Pew Bibles. So Genesis chapter 1, beginning at the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living thing with which the water teems, and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the seas and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. For the word of the Lord, thanks be to God.
Thanks, Peter. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're beginning a new series looking at Genesis, and we'll actually, over the next 14 weeks, go through most of the book of Genesis. So it's quite a journey to go through, really, the foundations and origins of the whole story of salvation and the book of the Bible that we have. I think I'll just see, have we got that slide with the picture? Great. And then I'll see if this works as well in a moment. Well, how did the world begin? There's many kind of different ways you could answer that short question. How did the world begin? And really it depends on what kind of story you want for that answer. For example, if I was to be asked, how did my family begin? I'll see if let me turn it on. Great, we're working. If I was asked, how did your family begin? I'm not sure how I would answer that question. I've never been asked that before. I only just thought about it in recent days. Would I answer in terms of biological reproduction? Based on the looks on people's faces, I don't think many would want that kind of an answer. I'm not sure. Would I describe the family trees for myself and Sarah? Would I describe our first meeting as a couple, our marriage, our decision to try to conceive, and our struggles with fertility or infertility and miscarriages? Would I describe Zoe's birth or bringing her home from the hospital, or how at our first breakfast together I made porridge and burnt the porridge and smoked out the whole house? There are many different ways to answer a question like, how did your family begin? Some might be interested in the how question of biology. As I said, probably most of you aren't looking for that today. Some might be wanting to know the who question. Who are all the different people involved? Others will want actually the why question. Why would you start a family? What impact does it have to your identity and the way you then live and your purpose? Of course, different answers aren't opposed to each other. Often when we tell a story, we'll include the how and the who. And a good story will hopefully point forward to the why as well. So if I go back to that first question, how did the world begin? What questions are you wanting addressed? What answers are you looking for? The question includes how did the world begin? But even as we think about the how, what are the specifics you're looking for in that word? What do we really care about? The how, if there's no indication of the who or the why as well. I sort of start this way because up until a few hundred years ago, most people in the Western world thought that the truths of the Bible would more and more be concord with or align with the truths that science and scientific discoveries bring to us. But in recent centuries, there's been new challenges and questions to that. Some might want to find contradictions between scientific discovery and these early chapters of Genesis. Others will insist that no, science and the first few chapters of Genesis must agree. that the Bible presents history, therefore Genesis 1 must be describing kind of like a almost eyewitness account of what really happened as the events unfold. Of course, there was no eyewitness at this description of Genesis 1, apart from God and I guess some humans there at the very end. So we shouldn't expect it to be a video replay of what happened, or even be similar to the many eyewitness accounts that we do find in the Bible. So I wanted to kind of just introduce it that way by then turning to you with this question. What questions do you have about the Bible's description of how the world began, of the world's beginnings? Sorry, let's remove that how there. What questions do you have about the Bible's description of the world's beginnings? And then the second question is, to what extent do you think it's appropriate to read Genesis 1 with modern scientific eyes? You've got a couple minutes just to sort of talk with your neighbour about those couple of questions. So over to you. All right, so we've had about 2 minutes there, so thank you for that. And we could go on for hours. In fact, there's so many books written about these sort of topics from all sorts of different angles and perspectives, and very happy to have these conversations with you personally after the service, whenever, and to try to point you to other things to read or look at. You've probably looked at different things yourself. But whatever your view, I want to kind of value and appreciate all different perspectives and questions that we have. And yet as we come now, in this short time, to look at Genesis 1 in particular, and the first few verses of chapter 2, I want our authority to actually be the Bible here. That's my kind of aim here, that's my authority. And that means actually, rather than trying to impose modern ideas on the ancient text, we actually want to step back for a moment from some of those questions we might have or start to discuss, and to try to listen to and pay attention to what this ancient text is actually saying. If we have God and His authority through His Word as our authority, then we actually need to give value and appreciation to the original ancient author that God mediated this word through. Because Genesis 1 wasn't actually written to us in the 21st century. It's written for us, for our salvation and wisdom, so we know about God and how to live as His people in the world. But it wasn't written to us. It had no idea, no concept of many of the modern scientific thoughts and questions we might have. They're not addressed, they're not engaged with, they're not trying to be answered here. So we actually need to do a little bit of work and step back from some of our own presuppositions and to focus more on the who and the why of this account, although the how is certainly important as well. And realise, as I mentioned, it's not an eyewitness account, certainly not a modern scientific account, it's an ancient account with an ancient human author given by God, written to ancient Israel. Now, there is that dialogue we need to have as we look at science and ask those questions, and yet I'm not really able to kind of engage with that properly here. Let's first of all listen to this text and what it might have been saying originally, and then how it might speak to us today. So let's get into it a little bit, and I haven't got much time, to be honest, but there is, as you look at the text, and I encourage you to have your Bible open. It's a translation, obviously, but it's page 1 of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, and for some reason the English translations The monk who did that many centuries ago separated the chapters after day 6 instead of day 7. That's why we went a little bit into chapter 7. But actually, day 7 is really so important to it all. But Genesis 1, it's a simple but majestic account of God bringing order to the cosmos, to the universe in a sense. There's great structure in this text with days 1 to 3 and days 4 to 6 providing two sides of the same story that then climaxes on day 7. Day 7, God takes up residence of the world. He's put to order. This account in Genesis 1 shows disdain to those other ancient creation accounts that were around in the Near East at the time. Unlike other stories that describe creation in terms of struggle and chaos, this account highlights God's sovereignty overall, bringing order and purpose to all that He's made. So each day follows a similar structure, as you probably noticed. So kind of there's a bit of a graphic representation of days 1 to 3 and then days 4 to 6 actually populating the framework, I guess, that God makes. Here we go. So what's the structure you might notice? You see there's a lot of repetition. I wouldn't quite describe it as poetry, but it's certainly poetic, isn't it? So God speaks a word of command. The command is obeyed, or God does the command He's spoken of. It's like magic, the way things happen. It was so, our text says. God looks at what is come into being and declares that it's good. That happens again and again. God names the thing He's brought into being, and the day comes to an end. It was evening, it was morning, the first day, for example. There are variants to that. So some exceptions you might have noticed if you look at the text and break it up. One of the things you can do is, which I did, is you copy the text onto a Word document, and then you kind of cut, or you could just do it yourself, but you color code or highlight a lot of the repetition to help you structure the text. You can do that with pencils or Microsoft Word, I guess, as well. But if we go back to that structure there, so days 1 to 3 followed by days 4 to 6. 1 to 3 set things up, and then days 4 to 6 have more specific creating and blessing that happens. 1 to 3, the foundations, and then the next 3 fill out those days. So let's look at the passage briefly now. So we start there with the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we see actually in verse 1 and 2 that the focus isn't actually on the wider universe as we understand it, but it's actually focusing on the space between the skies and the land. That word heavens, creating the heavens, is really talking about the skies. It's not so much talking about the place heaven, but the skies. Some translations actually use that. In verse 2, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So there's actually, we see even at the beginning, there's still raw materials there. The Bible is assuming God makes everything out of nothing, in a sense, or made something out of nothing, I guess you would say. But here, it's not actually talking about that moment of the Big Bang or whatever you might have as your theory. That's not the starting moment here. So whether you believe our world is 8,000 years old or 8 billion years old, verse 1 isn't referring to that very first moment there. There's raw materials here. But there's a lack of purpose. There's a lack of form there. There's formlessness and emptiness. It's like a wasteland. And this sense of darkness being over the surface of the deep, there's a sense I don't know if anyone's kind of a bit afraid of water or the ocean, maybe not here in Sandringham, but if you've ever had an experience of nearly drowning or perhaps difficult experience in a river or a waterfall, this is kind of calling some of that to mind. It's a scary picture to some degree, verse 2, where the deep and the waters are potentially fearful and dangerous. And yet the Spirit of God is hovering over these waters. So there's a sense of expectation or anticipation we see from verses 1 to 2. Then as we actually get to verse 3, we find God creates light. He says, "Let there be light," and there was light. What have we got on there? So there we go, sort of verses 1 to 2. It's a lack of form, it's emptiness, darkness. But God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. And then something strange happens, you might notice. Verse 5, God calls the light day. Why does God call light day? I don't know. It's a bit of a strange one, yeah. What do you think? Because there's light in the daytime. Yeah, there's a bit of logic to that. Yeah, that's right. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I did do first year physics, and I at least know when we think, what is light? Well, light is very different to day. Day really is talking about a period of time. Light is talking about radiation, photons, isn't it? They're quite different things. Why would God call radiation day, a period of time? Again, that's where we need to kind of step back from our modern scientific presuppositions and actually think about what might be going on here. In the structure of this text, there's a sense in which in day 1, even before the sun and the stars exist, that comes later, God is creating time here, isn't he? Something amazing is happening. He's actually defining periods of time, day and night, so there can be evening and morning. And then we get to the end of the first day. Well, let's keep moving, because day 2, God makes the vault or the dome of the sky. It kind of has an appearance of a solid dome or vault if you look up from the ground. Holds the upper waters, except of course when God allows it to come through when it rains. Again, it's quite a different picture of the world and cosmology and how the world works to what we have today. That's day 2, and then we get to day 3. Water still covers the earth, so God needs to take another act of separation by gathering the water to one place so that dry land appears. So here we go there. And so the gathered waters are called seas and the dry ground land. And again, throughout this, we see God's authority here. The who is primary here. God is exercising his authority and power in this story. And in day 3, God gives another self-fulfilling command. The land is to produce vegetation that will grow and also have the ability to reproduce. God won't need to continuously make vegetation, but there will be seeds and fruit with seeds in it, the text highlights. That's day 3. And so we're actually seeing a picture of the vast variety of plants and trees that are being created by God, and yet there's a purpose there of fruitfulness and reproduction. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning. We get to the end of the third day. Let's keep going quickly, because now we're kind of to that second phase, days 4 to 6, of populating those expanses that have been talked about. So God created light and day and night. Now he's actually putting those lamps, or the sun and the moon and the stars, in their place there. So verse 14, God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years." And it was so. God made 2 great lights, but notice, unlike the other days, he doesn't actually name these in this section. Not sure why that might be. Why doesn't it describe or speak of the sun or the moon or the stars? It just talks about them there. Well, other religions actually have deities or gods attached to the sun or the moon or the stars as well. There's a sense in which, in this account, it's making clear that God is sovereign over these, and these are mere lampposts or lights that shine, rather than giving the specific name. God is the one who sets them in place. God is the one who uses them to structure our days and our weeks and our calendars. There's a sense where this structure that's given here, this pattern of season, notice it talks about sacred times and days and years, is actually pointing forward to how God's people will have various seasons for worship, for rest, for celebration, sacred times and days and years as part of worshipping this Creator God. We see this in day 4. Then we get to day 6. Okay, things are getting exciting. So the waters will teem with sea creatures, and the birds will fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. And then he says to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." So we have this sense of blessing that God is giving here. God doesn't bless inanimate objects, but he does bless animals here, which have a purpose of fruitfulness and productivity in the world that is made. And we're getting close to the climax. It says day 7 on there, but actually I'm wanting to highlight day 6, where God creates the animals, the other animals, the land creatures, but in particular then humans as well. So day 6 pairs with day 3, of course, as I've shown. The vegetation's been provided, which will then provide food to the animals and to the humans. Interestingly, there's no blessing of these animals in day 6, the land creatures, unlike the birds and the sea creatures. Perhaps it's done that way to highlight the blessing that comes to humans as well. But there's a real shift that comes in verses 26 to 28 there, where God says, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that we may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals and all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Well, This is quite extraordinary. And you might ask, well, why does God say, let us make mankind in our image? It might be pointing forward to the communal nature of God that is revealed later, of God being three persons in one that we find later in the New Testament. It might be highlighting God's royalty in a sense. As a king, he's using the royal we. Let us make mankind in our own image. But the most important thing of verse 26 isn't so much the let us, but it's actually that humans are to be the image bearers. This passage is perhaps so familiar, it doesn't kind of strike us as being amazing, but what do all the other religions do in terms of their images or their icons? They build a temple and they put the statue or the icon in the temple. That's how other religions work. You see that even in some churches where they'll have statues of different figures and so forth, unhelpfully normally. But God creates the world. And who is to show his image, to be his icons in the world? It's humans. We're living, breathing image bearers, icons in his world, partnering with him as his people. People were to look at us and get a sense of this is what God is like. This is what the goodness of God, the love of God, the relational nature of God, the creativity of God is to be like. Humans being made in his image, in his own likeness. The other huge implication that comes from this is the whole issue of equality and human rights. Before this became mainstream in Western society, philosophers and ethicists never thought that humans are all equal. If you asked an ancient philosopher, if you asked an ethicist, a secular ethicist like Peter Singer, who works at Melbourne Uni, are all humans equal in dignity and value? They would say, absolutely not. It is blatantly obvious that some humans are stronger, some are weaker. Some are more productive, some are less productive. Some are going to be contributors to society, some are going to be a drain and burden on society and perhaps should be euthanized, for example. That's certainly the view of some ancient and contemporary ethicists today. But human rights, the Declaration of Human Rights, comes straight out of Genesis 1, and it's infiltrated the whole Western world for centuries. That, by and large, people, I know there's exceptions and changes are happening more and more, but the equality of all people is something we see in Genesis 1. Why? It's not obvious from looking at people that we're all equal. A philosopher or an ethicist might say, what magical power do you say that makes all people equal? Well, the answer is the magic comes from what God says in Genesis 1, that all people are equal in his eyes, in moral dignity, in value, because they bear his image. God created humanity in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. It's different races, different genders are all part of that. Male and female, he created them. So that's a huge thing. So as we kind of think about some of the application or implications of this story, let's just bring this here. I've got 3 brief points, and I know it's very hot, so let's wrap this up. In this Genesis 1, we see a God who is sovereign and powerful, a God who wants to bring order out of disorder, who has a purpose for what he's doing. This God, this powerful, eternal God, is worthy of our worship. Worship our Creator God. We also see that this God is made for relationship. This God provides for humans. Day 3 sets up all the seed-bearing plants and the trees with fruit in them so that humans are provided for, but he wants to be with his people and to dwell with them, which we'll see more of next week, of this God of relationship who wants to be in loving relationship with us. And then finally, the biggest one really is that issue of identity. Who are we as humans? That's something that science can't really answer in terms of our identity. Why were we created? Genesis 1 provides that we are image bearers. No matter our capacity, our race, our family, our background, we are made in God's image, infinite in dignity and value. And we are called to be like God, to exercise rule and authority in his world, under him, in partnership with him. We're not to be like his slaves, like other religions. We're called to partner with him, given an opportunity to partner with his work in the world. So let me pray as we continue on this journey that will be going on over the coming weeks as well. Heavenly Father, thank you for making us in your image, that you brought order out of disorder, purpose out of a space that was formless and void. Help us to celebrate your goodness and power, to worship you, to respond to you and the invitation to have a relationship with you, and to be people who are living out your image, your likeness in the world. We know this presents a picture of a world that doesn't exist as such anymore, that the world isn't quite as good as it once was in Genesis 1 and 2. But we know that through Christ we can be fully restored and fully experience the blessings of relationship with you, being redeemed to the image of your Son. So help us to respond in faith and to help each other on this journey. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.